Welcome to Civil War Talk Radio with host Jerry Prokopowicz. Our program covers all aspects of Civil War history, from the battlefields to the home fronts, and features guest experts, plus insight from your host as they discuss the most critical period in American history. Now, here is your host, Jerry Prokopowicz.
This is Jerry Prokopowicz with Civil War Talk Radio. September 17, 1862 was the bloodiest day in the Civil War, indeed in all of American military history, and the bloodiest part of that battlefield, one that changed hands time and again as the armies surged back and forth, was Miller's Cornfield. We'll talk about that famous piece of land and the soldiers who fought in and around it with David A. Welker, author of The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. That's tonight on Civil War Talk Radio.
Streaming live, the leader in Internet talk radio, VoiceAmerica.com.
Are you ready for a disaster? If you are like many people in the world, that answer may sadly be no. Disasters happen unexpectedly to people just like you every day. Tune into Preparing for the Unexpected with business continuity and disaster planning expert Alex Fullick. The show will not only help you better prepare for a disaster itself, but also to prepare you, your place of employment, and community for the aftermath, emotionally, financially, and with a better level of awareness and a stronger feeling of resiliency. Tune in Thursdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
The Internet's number one talk station. VoiceAmerica.com. You are listening to Civil War Talk Radio. If you have a question or comment about our program, please send an email to prokopowiczg@ecu.edu. That's PROKOPOWICZG@ecu.edu. Now, back to Civil War Talk Radio.
And welcome to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, coming to you tonight from the Civil War Talk Radio World Headquarters Annex on Oxford Road in Greenville, North Carolina. After 1 week in the building, the Brewster Building on the campus of East Carolina University, I'm back broadcasting from home tonight, not because they've closed the university or anything drastic like that, but just the way the schedule has worked out this week. It's the place to be this evening, a beautiful fall evening in September of 2021. But even though I am not on campus, that does not change the policy that I'm also not speaking for the campus, not for ECU, not representing them, nor will my guest represent anyone but himself, as we always do here. The university is still open. We are still teaching classes face-to-face in this second full pandemic academic year of 2021. The university seems much better prepared this year than it was last summer. Last fall, we have an online dashboard with current statistics showing how things are going in terms of testing and vaccinations and other statistics. And generally, the numbers are holding steady or improving slightly across the board. So, knocking on wood, we hope we can continue to teach in person. This return to campus has been, I will say, invigorating. I've certainly enjoyed being back in the classroom, and I have the sense the students really are as well. I notice that at the beginning of every academic year, people are gung-ho for a while. They come to class on time, they've done all their reading, and then that starts to drift away a little bit. But so far, the attendance has been really strong. The preparation for class has been really strong. The students seem to appreciate the opportunity to be doing this. You realize what you missed when you spend a year just talking to your professor through a screen, which is not a satisfactory substitute. Just as talking with you through the computer screen here is is fine. I enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. I appreciate you listening. It would be better if we could talk face-to-face, and in some cases we can. Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours offers opportunities for you to see see battlefield sites. The next one will be this October. It's already sold out, but we'll do one again in the spring, and I hope you can join me when we do that. I'll keep you informed of it. I mentioned the scores on the dashboard, the COVID dashboard were looking relatively positive in the sense they were negative. There's a word rabbit hole to go down. In contrast, the numbers on the football scoreboard this past weekend, not so good. The men should have won their game on Saturday against South Carolina, and the women lost their soccer match on Sunday that they should have won. The coach said it was not a good performance, so we're not going to talk sports tonight. Except I will point out, I went to the game, the football game, the men's football game on Saturday, first time in years, wanted to show support for the attempt to return close to normalcy. And the game was broadcast on the ESPN 11 or one of their many, many channels. And man, there are a lot of commercial breaks during American football. At home, I don't notice so much. If I'm watching a game, I have my book for Civil War Talk Radio open next to me, and when they go to commercial, I hit the mute button, read a few pages, take some notes, and then the game starts again. But when you're at the game, you can't do that. Can't really bring the book in. You can't look at your phone because the sun's too bright and the music is deafeningly loud. But you can see the little timer held out on the field showing 3 minutes till we start again. Are you kidding me? 3 more minutes of this? And it's again and again and again. It's really an absurd way to conduct a sport, if you ask me. But you're not asking me that. You are asking me instead, who's on the show next week? And the answer to that is Gil Hahn, author of Campaign for the Confederate Coast, Blockade Running, and Related Endeavors During the American Civil War. The last week of September, we'll have John David Smith, the co-editor of the book of essays called The Long Civil War, New Explorations in America's Enduring Conflict. We'll hear what's happening at the cutting edge of scholarship. And in October, we'll have some very interesting guests as well. Christopher Moore will be writing about and talking with us about J. William Jones, who he calls the Apostle of the Lost Cause. And we'll find out what that means. On the 13th, I'll be away leading a history tour, but I'll be back on October 20th with you and with Ronald White and his book on the Private Lincoln. And we'll finish up the month with a return to the show of an old friend, David Mowry. His current work we'll discuss is about Cincinnati in the Civil War. The same Cincinnati that is leaving the American Athletic Conference to go join a bigger one, the Big 12, who lost their two big teams. And ECU is thus left behind in the AAC. It's a constant round robin, but I said I wouldn't talk college sports. Instead, I'll remind you, you can find out what's going on by going to www.impedimentsofwar.org or the Impediments of War Facebook page. Our Gaffney is in charge of keeping us up to date there, who's going to be on the show. And you can buy books there by clicking on the Amazon symbol, and you can also donate to the show. Your donations are always welcome and will be used for important things like not football tickets. I already bought those, but something important, not something tax deductible. You already know that. Tonight's show is sponsored by Civil War Trails. Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum, offering 1,350 sites across 6 states. If you are inspired by what you hear tonight about the Battle of Antietam, the Civil War Trail's 1862 Antietam Campaign Trail allows you to follow Lee's invasion of Maryland turn by turn with over 24 stops along the way. You can request a brochure at civilwartrails.org on the internet. So follow Civil War Trails, create some history of your own. And that's the paid commercial message. I add my personal endorsement. Last week I pointed out Antietam is a battle you can see a lot of from one spot, from the visitor center, not like the wilderness that we talked about last week. But what you can't see from one spot at Antietam is the whole campaign to South Mountain, to Harper's Ferry. For that, you really do want the Civil War Trails brochure. And I know anytime I'm driving anywhere in that neighborhood or anywhere in Virginia, Maryland, Eastern North Carolina, if I see a Civil War Trails marker sign by the side of the road, I pull off and check it out, and I'm never disappointed. So Civil War Trails, excellent organization. Tonight's guest has written about the Battle of Antietam, David A. Welker. His book is called The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. David, are you there?
I am, Jerry. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, welcome to the show. Glad to have you. So you're usually, I would say usually, often we have people on the show that are professors or people who work at battlefields. I'm always curious what people do when they're not talking to me on Civil War Talk Radio. What's your day job?
So my day job is that I am a historian with the federal government. I've been with the same organization for 37 years and worked most of that as a military analyst, looking at various military campaigns and military forces around the world and analyzing those for federal policymakers. So that's what I do. But now I've moved on and I'm a historian for our agency. So a chance to bring both of my loves together.
Well, that is wonderful. And it's great to see how history affects the real world, how it's not just, we all here all enjoy it, we study it, we benefit from it and learn from it, but the idea that it lacks any real-world application, anyone who studied it knows that's not true, but your career shows that's obviously an important part of public policy.
In fact, I created a staff ride program to use Civil War battlefields to teach military analysis to our analysts and those who work on military accounts or military-related issues, so that they could see a battle unfold and learn how to use the U.S. Army's principles of war to understand and to evaluate a fast-moving battle. So I take groups out to Antietam, Manassas, Gettysburg, and other places to teach those sessions to them.
Well, that is a great tradition in American military education. We've had people who've led staff rides on the show in the past, and it really is a great way to learn about principles of war by seeing how they're implemented during the American Civil War. Mm-hmm. Is that where you got the idea to write about the cornfield?
It is in part. I always think that there are two drivers behind any published book, or at least I find there are. There's a practical driver, and in this case, the practical driver was wanting to understand how the Battle of Antietam unfolded in as much detail as possible. And as I began digging to do that work many years ago, I was not satisfied with what was available about the cornfield. There was a lot about the Sunken Road or Bloody Lane. There was a lot about Burnside Bridge or some of the other actions, the West Woods. But the cornfield in particular just seemed this disjointed mess. And a lot of the standard books on Antietam had either glossed over or oversimplified the cornfield action. And I thought, well, why is that so? And I started doing my own research, and the more I did that, the more it led toward a book. But the other part of that is the intellectual driver, the sort of big question that you want to answer, the why question. And the more I got into the what of Antietam, what was the fighting like, where did the actions begin, and where did the troops move to create this battle, that drove me to dig deeper into the why. Why was the cost of the fighting in the cornfield so high? Why had nobody really satisfactorily, at least in my view, delved into understanding this action? And why was Miller's cornfield so important that it became the cornfield, as if there were no other. There are other cornfields that are fought in the Civil War, and including in Antietam, but Miller's cornfield becomes the cornfield. And the more I dug into this, the more I really wanted to know why did that happen.
So as you say, there are other cornfields, there are wheat fields, there are peach orchards that all become known by one name, but this one has not really been looked at in the same kind of detail up to this point. The book, however, is not just about the cornfield. That when I first came across it and it was presented to me as, here's something you might do on the show, my immediate thought is, are we really going to talk 45 minutes about just the cornfield? And I'm happy to say I enjoyed reading the book. It's not just about the cornfield. It puts it in context. And indeed, you start out discussing the campaign in some detail. Why was it necessary to take us all the way back to the beginning of the campaign to make this work?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I tried very much to do. So I'm glad to hear that you found that helpful. I'm often critical of books that look at a battle as if it were a chess match. And it's all about moving here and firing and moving there and attacking and retreating. And there's a place for books that are sort of nuts and bolts. But to me, it's important to understand the context of these actions, because they're not being fought as a chess match or as something that they didn't have anything else to do that day, so, well, let's have a battle. They're doing that to achieve something. And so to understand whether any battle or an action within a battle was successful, you need to understand the context of what did the two nations or the two sides fighting it want to achieve. What did the generals want to achieve? How successful were they in meeting those goals? And so that's why I think, we needed to start with the campaign. What did Davis and Lincoln want to achieve, and how did Lee and McClellan see this action as fitting into that?
I think that works well here, that you give us that story. So it presents both some political background, not overwhelming, and then also the strategic and operational background that gets us to the actual battlefield. We'll get to the actual battlefield after we take a short break. We're talking tonight with David A. Welker, author of The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz. This is Civil War Talk Radio.
Stimulating talk
gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
All the time. The #1 internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
Psych Up Live with host Dr. Suzanne Phillips offers a psychological perspective on coping with common and current life issues. This show addresses topics as varied as marital stress, insomnia, depression, raising teens, campus violence, and building self-resilience. Listen in as Dr. Phillips and her guest experts share the latest in books, findings, and information that will inform and enhance your life journey. Psych Up Live is heard every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Attention veterans, are you ready to be your own boss? It's time to launch your own ideas into reality. Discover your clean writing style. Gear up with Marine Corps trained motivator Christina Silva. Christina is a positive energy promoter with a special gift in connecting with innovators. Get the Military Heroes 411 and glean from experts every week by listening to The Christina Silva Show. We're educating our veterans live on The Christina Silva Show, live at 5 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Streaming live. The leader in internet talk radio. VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Civil War Talk Radio. If you have a question or comment about our program, please send an email to prokopovichg@ecu.edu. That's PROKOPOWICZG@ecu.edu. Now, back to Civil War Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, talking tonight with David A. Welker, author of The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. If you're listening to this and not driving your car and can actually get up out of the sitting position, this would be a good time to go grab a map or two of the Battle of Antietam. If you've got this book, which you should, you can use the maps in there. If not, you've probably got Stephen Sears on your shelf, Landscape Turned Red, or James McPherson's book, or maybe you have Old Unreliable, the West Point Atlas of American Wars. You can open that. But get a map of Antietam, and then you'll know about the places we're talking about. In very broad terms, the two battle lines are formed north on a north-south axis, and the cornfield is at the north end of the battlefield. But Dave, tell us more about about Miller's cornfield, the Miller farm. What kind of terrain are we talking about?
Yeah, the Miller farm itself is central to this action. It's David and Margaret Miller bought this farm, or actually David's father bought it, and they had married in 1846. They had a thriving small farm. There's some barns. It's straddled by the Hagerstown Pike, although most of the tilled land was behind it, and really three behind the house, and really three fields: a plowed field in the north, a fallow or grassy field to its south, then the cornfield itself, and then another grassy field, triangular shaped field that ran down toward the Smoketown Road. And the cornfield, because it was corn, was a fenced field. And that fence, even though it was just a Virginia worm fence, became an obstacle, just as the corn did, to the men who would be marching through it. But the field itself it's a relatively modest field, 24 acres, 500 yards long by 250 yards wide. It's what it's surrounded by that makes the cornfield so important, because it's in a box of woods. So to the north is the North Woods, the East Woods, and shockingly to the West Woods across the Hagerstown Pike. And it's into that box that General Hooker is going to launch his opening attacks at dawn on 17 September 1862. And the terrain itself is rolling. If you were to stand there today and look at it, even if it's planted in corn, you would say, well, it's not really, it's not very mountainous, particularly compared to the Battle of South Mountain, fought 3 days earlier. It's nothing like that. This is a walk in the park, and you can see everything. And you can see much farther than the troops could at South Mountain. And yet, those rolling hills, if you walk the Cornfield Trail today from the North Woods to Cornfield Avenue, where the Confederate salient was set up by Jackson, you can appreciate just how imposing this seemingly benign terrain becomes. You can lose yourself. If you look back at the Pennsylvania monuments, which you can only see now in the winter because the North Woods is beginning to grow back, thanks to the Park Service. When you start walking, that monument, which is easily 15 feet tall, simply disappears just in the terrain. And so there was that added to the confusion, as did those woodlots.
So the corn was high at the time of the battle.
Yes, Yeah, it was September. It was the most dreaded time of a farm boy's year, harvest time, and David Miller had not gotten around to harvesting his corn yet. So when the troops arrived there, it was a thick cornfield. Now I should add that in the 19th century, corn cultivation was different than it is today. Today, with the high yield farming techniques and fertilizers, we have cornfields are just packed, as tight as they can be. In the 19th century, they had to space the corn out. So each corn plant was planted on a little mound in a row that made it look much more like a checkerboard. And what that meant for the troops going into it is they could go forward relatively easily. Men could pick a line and there would be order moving north or south. But moving diagonally was still tricky. And unlike today when you don't need those mounds, at the Battle of Antietam, there were those mounds, and that simply made the organization of the troops marching through it that much more difficult to maintain.
Now, you said that this is where the Federal troops of General Hooker started the battle on the 17th. They were marching from north to south at the left end of the Confederate line. This is part of McClellan's plan. What was McClellan's plan for this battle?
That's a great question, and it's still a matter of debate. And I wrestled with this for quite a while when I started doing my research, because I came to it with the sort of maybe educated layman's understanding of this battle, which was that there's a Union attack on the right, and then an attack in the center, and then an attack from the Union left, and it moves from north to south, which is that conventional understanding. But the more I researched it, the more it was apparent that wasn't what McClellan had planned. It may be what appeared to have occurred, but what he really wanted to do was a much more common sense West Point centric plan, which was a three-pronged attack. The first opening attack would be from the Union right against the Confederate left, and that's what was under the command of General Hooker. Then, when that attack was either successful or well underway, McClellan would launch an attack on the opposite flank by Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps. And of course, we all know how that actually turned out. But then once that both attacks on the flanks were underway, and Lee had presumably thinned his center to defend his flanks, at that point, McClellan would unleash the 5th Corps, commanded by Fitzjohn Porter, his confidant and friend, as well as containing the U.S. regulars under George Sykes, again, from the West Point perspective, the most dependable and well-trained troops, along with Pleasanton's cavalry. And so that would be the final attack that would strike Lee's weakened center and break the line. Now, the goal here was, I think, to use the terrain to McClellan's advantage. He knew the Potomac River was behind Lee, and Lee, when the battle started, had really three options to escape if things went badly. He could go north to Hagerstown. He could go south to Harper's Ferry, which Jackson had just taken, or he could go due west to Shepherdstown. And by launching those flanking attacks, McClellan was very effectively planning to cut two of the three escape routes, leaving Lee only that one route back to Shepherdstown, which was several miles away, which would trap the Confederate wagon train, all of its ammunition, or much of it, most of its artillery, on that side of the Potomac to be taken by McClellan. So it was, I think, a pretty good plan. It was something that all the generals would understand had he actually shared that with them.
Now, that's one of the many criticisms that emerges in your writing of McClellan. After we start with your suggestion that he made a reasonable, if not an effective plan, He doesn't tell all his generals. He does tell Hooker. Hooker seems to know what the plan is. And he goes in first. And that means he's going to march through Miller's farm, including the cornfield. How does that work out?
Well, and again, McClellan deserves a lot of credit for his planning. There are a lot of things George McClellan does poorly, but planning and organizing are his two strengths, and they are very much evident here. He tells Hooker, who he knows is going to have the toughest part of this three-pronged attack. The opening attack is the one that Lee will be able to throw the most forces against. We don't know how many troops McClellan believed that Lee had. He probably overestimated his size, but he certainly didn't think that he was outnumbered, as were some claims later on. But the plan was for Hooker to launch his opening attack. He was given his own First Corps and given command of it to organize and implement that attack as he saw fit. Later in the evening on the 16th, Hooker realized how difficult this was. He rode back and asked for reinforcements. And at that point, McClellan dispatched the 12th Corps under General Mansfield to support him. So Hooker's got these two corps, and he is, rides the lines that night. He looks at the ground, and he evaluates how can I plan this attack against a force that I don't know its location, I don't know its size, and I don't know what position they'll be in the morning, what changes they may make overnight, and I have to launch this at dawn to buy as much time as possible for this big, ambitious plan to come off. So Hooker plans, again, I think an effective scheme to strike Lee's left of center. He's not going to try and turn the flank. He doesn't know where it is. He doesn't have the cavalry to find that. He doesn't have the time to find it. So he's going to ignore where the line is, and he's going to send his forces to one chosen point on the line and punch a hole in that line. And he chooses as his objective the Dunker Church. And again, this shows Joe Hooker knows what he's doing as well, because the Dunker Church, small white church that it is, it stands out as an obvious landmark. So every commander, no matter how confused the battle will be, can simply look around and find their objective. So that's the plan. And he's going to send two of his three divisions forward across Miller's farm, headed toward the Dunker Church. Doubleday's division on his right is going to move directly south on the Hagerstown Pike toward the Dunker Church. Meanwhile, Ricketts' division will march diagonally across the cornfield, and the two divisions will then presumably meet at the Dunker Church. Jackson responds, I think, this is vintage Jackson. He's on the defense, because this is what Lee has chosen. Lee has decided from the start to let the Federals bang themselves against this high ground that we hold, with the woods providing cover for our position, and we'll take advantage of the terrain where we can. He puts D.H. Hill's division out in the sunken road, well out of well ahead of the main Confederate line. But this is he's taking advantage of the gifts that the terrain has given him. Jackson, similarly, sees where the Federals are forming. They skirmished in the East Woods the night before, and he could see troops pouring into the North Woods. And so he creates a salient. He puts essentially two brigades of Lawton's division out into that the cornfield, what today is Cornfield Road, a Park Service road that was not there at the time, and has them facing north, perpendicular to the main Confederate line. So wherever Hooker attacks, he's likely to attack into a vice. So it's very effective, and Hooker obliges Jackson by marching right into the front of that.
So he goes into Hooker's troops go into the cornfield. They encounter the rebels. On their first pass, they actually, you pointed, they sort of go right through it. They make a great deal of progress, but that's as far as they're going to get in some cases through most of the day. The Confederates counterattack, and that really sets the motif for the whole story. Union advances, goes through into or through the cornfield. Confederates launch a counterattack. They push the Federal troops out. Now they're in the cornfield or beyond it, and then they get pushed back. And this happens repeatedly.
Yeah, 8 times.
The
cornfield changes hands eight times in the course of about 2.5 hours.
So it would be good to describe each of these in detail, but we do not have the appropriate hours to do that. But but it's fascinating to read because each one is different. There are highlights and lowlights. The Union at one point would succeed, but one of the brigade commanders, General Christian, essentially has a breakdown, it looks like, and simply loses his self-possession and won't advance his troops and finally wanders off. You don't see that in too many Civil War battles of a brigade commander simply literally having a mental breakdown on the field of battle, but we see it here. There are lots of vignettes. The 1st Texas, in a later counterattack, suffers, I think you'd say it's the highest percentage casualties of any regiment.
That's right, 82.6% casualties, 45 killed, 145 wounded of 226 engaged in the 1st Texas, the highest number of Confederate casualties for any regiment throughout the entire war.
It's just astonishing that these people stand up to it. It's also a style of war that we see here and continue to see it into 1863, but the idea of standing up in the open, line facing line, and shooting at each other will, of course, go away by the time we get to the Overland Campaign 2 years later. But here they're still doing it, and it's just brutal.
Right.
We're going to take a short break, actually, and come back and discuss more of the consequences of the cornfield's occupation by both sides. We're talking tonight with David A. Welker. He's the author of The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz. This is Civil War Talk Radio.
Streaming live, the leader in Internet Talk Radio, VoiceAmerica.com.
We're making it easier to listen to the Voice America Talk Radio Network wherever you go. In addition to listening live, you can check out information about your favorite talk show hosts, discover new talk show personalities, add shows to your list of favorites, and listen to all of our show archives on demand, all from your iOS, Amazon Kindle, or Android device. Download it from the Apple App Store, Amazon, or Google Play, and get ready to tune in. The Voice America mobile app, powered by Aircast.
If you think you've seen online TV before, let us surprise you.
VoiceAmerica.tv is online now.
The leader in live Internet talk radio has done it again. Multiple channels, a state-of-the-art viewing experience, live and on-demand programs streaming 24 hours a day. It's exactly what you want, when you want it.
VoiceAmerica.tv.
From health and wellness to business, sports, and everything in between. Discover our new world. Visit VoiceAmerica.tv now and experience the future of online television.
VoiceAmerica.tv.
Stimulating talk
gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
all the time. The #1 Internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
You are listening to Civil War Talk Radio. If you have a question or comment about our program, please send an email to prokopowiczg@ecu.edu. That's PROKOPOWICZ OWICZG@ECU.edu. Now, back to Civil War Talk Radio.
And welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, talking tonight with David A. Welker, author of The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. David, we've been talking about the back and forth nature of the fighting here, and I don't think we need a spoiler alert. I'll go out on a limb and say 100% of our listeners know the outcome of the Battle of Antietam. McClellan's plan ultimately doesn't work. One of the things, though, that struck me reading your book is not only the enormous carnage among the soldiers, the rank and file in the cornfield, but the company officers, the field officers, the regimental commanders, brigade commanders, and even on the Union side, Hooker himself is given, you said, command of 12th Corps as well, or reinforcements from 12th Corps. But the commander of the 12th Corps, Joseph Mansfield, is mortally wounded in the battle, and Hooker is wounded during the battle. Even the very highest officers are close enough to the fighting that they will become casualties or may become casualties. Is that what undoes the plan for the Union, this high officer loss rate?
I think it's a little of both. I think there was a lot of confusion, and they say that no plan survives first contact in any battle, and Antietam is certainly a textbook case of that. McClellan's plan was very rigid, and he, unlike Lee, and I point out in the book that Lee is an iterative thinker. He is a man who can look at an unfolding situation that looks like a disaster and find a glimmer of hope, which is why they're fighting in Antietam at all, because he found a glimmer of hope in Jackson's taking Harper's Ferry. McClellan, on the other hand, is a linear thinker, I argue, and he comes up with a good plan. It's a well thought out plan and implemented thoroughly, but battles require flexibility and agility, and George McClellan is not the man to do that. So, he sticks to that plan, and he's waiting for that first phase to be successful because it's the key phase. Hooker needs to get up on the Dunkerchurch Ridge, break Lee's line on the left, have it falling back, and most importantly, take that position so he can put artillery up there to support the drive by the 5th Corps, that final third phase of his battle plan. Because they get stuck, the Federals, Hooker, Mansfield, Williams, Greene later on, and of course Sumner when he takes over on the Federal right, they get stuck fighting for these intermediate objectives. So Hooker spends really the 2 corps he's got to simply take control of the cornfield. Mm-hmm. He never gets to fight for the Dunkerchurch Ridge. He's wounded, as you pointed out. So it's that Jackson in the defense kept creating obstacles and making Hooker fight for intermediate objectives he may not have understood he was fighting for. First the cornfield, then the East Woods, pushing them even farther back, and then finally Greene's division. Once Hooker realizes what's happened, he adapts and changes his plan. So instead of sending Williams' division of the 12th Corps over the same ground to duplicate what his 1st Corps had been unable to do, he changes and works those 2 divisions together. Williams is sort of a blocking force in the cornfield over that ground they've just been fighting over facing south, and then having Greene swing in a massive left wheel around like a barn door that turns the right of Jackson's salient position along modern Cornfield Avenue and then pushes it back. It's that adaptation that changes things, and perhaps had Joe Hooker not been wounded and driven from the fight, maybe things would have been different. But then it changes again, and and when Sumner comes on and he has no clue, all he knows is he doesn't know McClellan's plan, and so he kind of makes it up as he goes along.
Well, he throws Sedgwick's division into the West Woods in a famous disastrous attack. You point out that they go in a line of brigades, 3 brigades, each in its own line, which I was surprised. You describe it as a flexible formation. I've always thought of it as an inflexible, an awkward formation. What was flexible about it?
So it's a column of brigades, which means that the 3 brigades are marching one in front of another. And it's a compact formation that lacks punch, but what it has is mobility. So the only brigade that can really engage is the 1st Brigade in line. The other 2 are simply following it across the cornfield and that open ground where the Philadelphia Brigade Monument is today at the West Woods. Once they engaged, once that front line stopped, wherever they hit the toughest opposition, then Sumner has a choice. He can either deploy those second 2 brigades both on the left, both on the right, or one on each side. So it allows him to, once he's engaged in battle, he has to quickly evaluate what he's dealing with and figure out where is the vulnerability, where do I want to put the most mass of my troops and firepower to make a difference.
So he can extend the line left or right, but what he can't do is turn to face left or right, and that's where the attack's going to come from.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And where Sumner, I think, falls apart in that action is he gets into the woods and he is essentially duplicating John Sedgwick's division commander role. He's not acting as corps commander. He is busy making sure that the various brigades in Sedgwick's division are in place. Perhaps had his 2nd Division, Franklin, been up and positioned, and maybe Sumner would have acted like a corps commander. Instead, he is duplicating John Sedgwick's role, and that means that he never deploys those troops. They hit the obstacle of Early's brigade and others that are remaining of Jackson's very, very thin and really about to crack line. And instead of deploying them, they simply stand there. Dana and Howard's brigades just stand there waiting to be told what to do because Sedgwick is busy, but Sumner, who should have been deploying them or telling Sedgwick to deploy them, is busy riding the line, evaluating the position. So they stand there, and it's into that open flank that McLaws' Confederate division attacks, as you said.
So, I'm getting a signal that my battery's running down here, so I'm going to be plugging in as we talk.
Okay.
Don't anyone go away. So take a moment. As I was reading about this, you also described that McClellan is, where is McClellan all this time?
So throughout the morning, McClellan is at his headquarters. Now, there are various descriptions of McClellan being in his Pry House headquarters or forward headquarters, where he's observing the battle and he's unreachable. And that's partly because Edwin Sumner is spending the morning there waiting to be told what to do, and he's getting frustrated. So he's at his headquarters. He's almost certainly not, sleeping or having breakfast, as is sometimes alleged. He's probably isolating himself and having aides bring information in so that he isn't being dragged into this fight. He sees his job as coordinating those 3 attacks. And if that was the case, he's right, because he's the only one who can, from that position, that elevated position, in the more or less the center rear of the battle, manage this relatively large action. Compared to Gettysburg, it seems very tight and compact. But in 1862, this was a pretty big battle and a lot of terrain that he could not personally see. So McClellan's being in the rear and the center, he's at that, the peak of that inverted pyramid. If the base of the pyramid is where the men are firing at the enemy from, he's standing at the top of that pyramid, moving all those troops.
It reminded me of that short story by Ernest Swinton, written in the 19th century, about a general who plans a big battle, and on the day of the battle he goes fishing. And the author's point is that's the way to do it, that anything he says that day will just mess up the plan. He's done his job. Now it's up to the subordinates to execute. And anything he does will just interfere and make it worse.
Yep. And that's exactly how McClellan liked to run. If you look at how he ran his operations on the peninsula, he saw his role as senior commander as setting the strategic objectives for his army, and then choosing a commander who could effectively lead the tactical planning and fighting. And he does that very much here. Chooses Hooker, chooses Burnside, and Porter. And they're the ones who are going to implement those actions. He can't be everywhere at once. And
now, so he never actually sees the cornfield, as far as I can tell.
Late early in the afternoon, when the fighting there is long over, McClellan does ride into the cornfield.
Okay.
He could not see it during the time that all the fighting was going on. That was obscured by terrain. So he could see smoke, he could hear the sound of fighting, but he couldn't see anything that was happening. So he had no idea how badly the cornfield was going, really, until he gets a message from the front, a dispatch from Sumner, and some aides return telling him how bad things are going. That's the first time he realizes how badly things have gone in his opening phase of the battle on the Union right. And that probably, we don't know why, but it probably prompts him to ride to the right. And that's when he resolves the dispute between Sumner and General Franklin.
So, many analysts of this battle would say that it's McClellan's fault that the United States forces couldn't win with the overwhelming numerical superiority they bring to the field. It seems like this book argues that the plan wasn't necessarily faulty. It wasn't the plan as much as the execution of it.
That's right.
That if McClellan had just, what's the minimum that would have had to be different for this to work?
So it's a bit ironic in a way. I spent much of the research being critical of McClellan for not being that iterative thinker that Lee was and sticking so rigidly to his plan. And finally, when I got to evaluating what really went wrong, why did this plan fall apart, it occurred to me that the moment he should have stuck with the plan, that's when he changed it. If he had let Porter and the Fifth Corps and the U.S. regulars and the cavalry attack the weakened center late in the day, it almost certainly would have broken Lee's line in two. And yes, darkness was coming, and so he was losing operational time, and I think he may have leaned too heavily on that. But I argue if McClellan, instead of abandoning the plan and hoping that somehow Burnside could make something work in the second phase and canceling that final attack by the regulars and the Fifth Corps, that if he just let that happen, he might well have won.
And then we would have had the spectacle of Pleasanton's cavalry with sabers drawn launching a Napoleonic cavalry charge.
That's right. And that's exactly what he wanted. McClellan is often criticized for using the cavalry as his Praetorian Guard, but that misunderstands what McClellan was trying to do here.
So we're near the end of our time. I really enjoyed this book. It does we've talked a lot about McClellan and the leadership. I think the analysis there is exceptionally interesting. There's a lot of tactical detail as well for listeners who like to get into the weeds, or in this case, into the corn plants. There's a lot of that too. So you'll enjoy that. Do you have another project coming up down the road?
Yeah, so I'm actually researching the Invalid Corps. No history has ever been written of the Invalid Corps, the Union Invalid Corps, which made a significant contribution to the war effort that is underappreciated, and they did an awful lot of things that no one knows about. So I want to bring that out, as well as the Confederate Invalid Corps, and very few people even know there was a Confederate Invalid Corps.
No, absolutely not. That would be news. Well, those will be that will be interesting to read about. I will certainly look forward to that. I enjoyed reading and learning about this place, which I've visited many times, and thought I knew something about, but was put in the shade by reading David A. Welker's book, The Cornfield, Antietam's Bloody Turning Point. Really enjoyed it. Dave, thanks for being on the show, and good luck with the next project.
Well, thank you for having me, Jerry.
And listeners, as always, thank you for listening to Civil War Talk Radio.
Thank you for embarking on a part of American history this week. Civil War Talk Radio with Jerry Prokopowicz can be heard live every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel. Have a good week.